I'd like to call this special meeting of the Great Island Advisory Committee to order on July 22nd at 6 o'clock. Hopefully it's 79, you're good to go. So it's great to see everyone here, either on Zoom. We have a couple of committee members that are here on Zoom, and we have Craig Flaherty from Redness and Mead that's participating by Zoom. But we have the full committee is here, so that's terrific. We first heard about Great Island's availability about 28 months ago in March of 2022. We closed on the purchase about 14 months later in May of 2023, and then we finished purchasing the Circle on 23A in 6 months after that. So these efforts took this work took a lot of time, it took a lot of effort, and it took a lot of teamwork. We will own this property forever, so we need to approach it with careful planning and patience. And while this may take many years, it's important to start now to ensure that our residents can begin enjoying the benefits of this acquisition soon. We're about to start the next phases with this beautiful asset. Many in town have now experienced the property and will soon make it more accessible by widening the access road for safety. This is just the beginning of our journey to transform Great Island into a community space we can all enjoy and be proud of. To help us develop a vision plan balancing historical and environmental preservation with modern sustainability, I'd like to introduce and reintroduce representatives from our landscape architect firm, Reed Hilderbrand. So tonight with us we have Becca Sturgis. Becca?
Hello. And
is Meg here?
Meg has been delayed because of CloudStrike, and she's still on her way back from California.
Okay.
So we have the rest of our team.
She might not make it. No. She might not make it tonight.
Can't make it tonight.
We have Michael Weidman, and we have Michelle Ton and Felicia Perez. Reed Hilderbrand has worked on projects around the world that are both larger and smaller than Great Island. I visited some of their work in the area, including the Breakers and the Blue Garden in Newport, Rhode Island, Storm King in New Windsor, New York, and Long Dock Park in Beacon, New York. Maybe some of you have visited these places also. Other notable projects in our area include the Weathersfield Estate in Amenia, New York, Hollister House Garden in Washington, Connecticut, and the Clark Institute in Williamstown, Massachusetts. So I mention these because I think it's terrific for firsthand experience to go and visit these places, and they're all within a comfortable drive. Of course, you can always access them on the website if you would like to see them, but I think taking a ride would be terrific. We are confident that choosing Reed Hilderbrand was the right decision, and our early interactions with them have only reinforced this thought. So with that, I'll turn it over to Becca. Thank you.
Quick request from the Zoomers here. I think the account has the option blur my background selected, so most of what I'm seeing is a big blur. So if someone could go to the video and unclick blur my background, we might be able to see a little more. Thank you.
Usually don't see
You're going to stop video. Okay. Video. Much better. Excellent.
So just to pick up from Monica, I'm Becca Sturgis. I'm the partner in charge from Reed Hilderbrand, and we are thrilled to be launching with you, getting started this evening on this great endeavor. I think it's really helpful that you already shared how many months you've already been committed to the project and seeing it through. I think we are new to your team to help you see it through further. And today we have a much larger team actually who's going to be involved, but we wanted to start with a core people from Reed Hilderbrand who are going to be sort of holding your hand, so to speak, as we move together through really getting a much better understanding about what's possible, what's necessary, and what is most wanted for the island. So I think you see here we're just saying getting started, because that's really what tonight is about. Our hope is with you today that it's clear where we're going. And I think most important what's come forward is not just that we're really sensitive and knowledgeable and sort of acute in the recommendations and directions we set for the island, but that we are doing it in an incredibly participatory way that feels really embracing of all the folks in Darien. And so we really are going to stress tonight how we're looking to do that with you all and what our approach to outreach is. So just to share, if we go to the next slide. I think for us, and I've been asked this question a number of times since even I last met with this committee, what is the most sort of stunning part of Great Island? And I think it's that this, because it's an island and because of what it's surrounded by in almost every direction, it feels so coastal, so much more coastal than it actually is. It really feels like such a almost wild place. And so we like this vantage point because you get this sense of just how watery the island is in its surround. And I think for us, the question of how we connect people to the water and to all the views in so many different directions, and how we make the island feel vast, even though it turns out it's only 68 acres, is one of the things we're going to be pursuing with all of you. Go to the next slide. So we kept the agenda for today very simple. We're going to have a little introduction. We're going to talk about finding a vision. And then we thought, because this is a public process, that we would very briefly touch on a couple of the possible futures that we shared with you all during the interview. So we're not bringing forward potentially new directions, but we're really trying to set a stage for where we go from here for the community. So with us tonight from Reed Hilderbrand, I'm Becca. Meg Riskin was supposed to be here. She's been racing back from California, but has been stalled out. I think it's something like 5 times so far, so hopefully she gets back this evening. She will be the project manager. Michael Weideman, who is sitting behind me, thanks. He will be our sort of design director for the project, leading sort of how we think about the structures, the roads, the paths, the trails, and the ecology. Michelle Tong, who is standing in front of you, will be in charge of the community outreach through the vision process. And then Felicia, who has an amazing past career in hospitality and sort of community happiness, I would say. She's just graduated from the Graduate School of Design, where she was the head of Student Forum and sort of relatively famous within that community for how great all her events were. So ensuring that we all have as positive an experience as possible as we go forward together is to be one of her tasks on the team. Next. That is the core group from Reed Hilderbrand. We are just the landscape architects on the team. There are many other experts who are necessary for us doing this in a really thoughtful, careful, and I would say like as wasting as little as possible, right? Resources are incredibly precious here, and so we want to make sure that as we move ahead, we don't have to double back and we don't make decisions that haven't been thought through. So with that in mind, we have a series of people to advise us on sort of governance and finances, James Lehman Planning and Design, also Durham Consulting, who are really expert cost consultants. ETM associates, they'll be with us to make sure that the maintenance logics, the operations for Great Island are well understood, and any costs involved or new job positions that feel like they might be required if we go in a certain direction, that they're accounted for. Then moving sort of further east, we did try to put together a team that was as sort of Long Island Sound centric and kinetic centric as possible. We have a number of folks to advise on what I'm going to call sort of architecture, but also just activities, how we activate the site and make sure that those are really comfortable. So Atelier Cho Thompson is a up-and-coming firm from San Francisco and New Haven. They have won all sorts of awards for the kinds of pavilions and public spaces and educational spaces that they've built. They're really good with adaptation and community outreach and branding. And then we have Knight Architecture. You all met on the committee, George Knight, because we brought him to the interview. His particular expertise in his firm is historic preservation, and you have some of the most beautiful structures on the island, and so we want to be really kind of careful as we think about those. Langen, who is sort of famous throughout the whole nation for their engineering expertise, and they have basically almost every form of engineering under the roof, so we've tasked them with particular jobs related to civil engineering, but if we need to, they bring sort of resources that can go beyond that if we have to. And then lastly, to mention Atelier 10 for lighting. I think being able to use the island after the sun sets, there will be occasions where that feels important, and lighting is a really important part of how the island stays safe and can accommodate those kinds of activities. And lastly, John Pescatore, who is sort of famous locally in the New Haven area for the way he set up community boating, sort of opportunities for folks in a cost-effective and also very safe way. And we're aware that, you know, Long Island Sound is such a beautiful place to be on a boat, but actually it looks very calm and tranquil, and it can be a little bit more testing and difficult than many of us expect. So we wanted to make sure that we had someone who could keep us all safe as we go forward, really thinking about what it means to have water in all directions around this island. Okay, we can keep going. I didn't mention the arborist, actually. I think I should keep going. So we have also an accessibility consultant. Go back, because I should go all the way to Boston. So from Stonington, we have actually one of our favorite arborists who did work with us in Bridgeport and is incredibly careful in his understanding of mapping and understanding how we preserve really valuable trees. And we're going to be seeking to do that as much as possible on the island. Kim A, they are all about universal accessibility and helping us understand how we take this island with its topography and its old historic structures that are lifted way off the ground and allow everyone to be able to come in and do what they want to do there. And then lastly, should we make improvements and changes to the grounds, irrigation will be a necessary part of that, and how we do that with as little of a footprint as possible is why we have Aquarius on our team. And biohabitats will be overseeing our ecological resources and directions there. Okay, that is the full team, so everybody knows. So when we last spoke, we talked about how when you have a resource like this, a beautiful piece of sort of natural land that also has an architectural legacy to it, if that legacy is that of a single family, it's not prepared to house a full community. And so one of the big questions that we've identified as a sort of fork that needs really careful consideration for the community is how much do we activate the island and how much do we preserve the island? And even as you think about activation, is it for large events where, you know, routinely there are 500, 1,000 people coming to celebrate something, or is it more a steady state of 10 to 50 people going for a stroll, and it feels always very quiet, right? So there's a lot of control that the community holds in terms of how the island becomes activated, and we need to weigh in on that. And then even when you talk about preservation, if you really want to maximize the preservation of the ecological well-being of the island, and think about the bald eagle and some of the other species that everybody is excited about, it's possible that we will make choices about the preservation of the architecture to not preserve every single building and try and put enormous resources, financial resources, into the upkeep and stabilization and change of those architectural structures. So preservation is clearly a major path forward for Great Island, but exactly what we mean by preservation is something we're all going to have to come to define together. Then this is a quick map of how Great Island fits into the other green spaces and open spaces in the town of Darien. And at 68 acres, Great Island is not as big as some of the beloved parks in Greenwich or some of the adjacent communities, but it's quite large for Darien. This is a really meaningful new public space for the town of Darien. Not just in its size, because it is amongst the largest, but also because of its amazing access to water. And looking and reading, which we've done, all the planning documents from the town from the last 10 or 15 years, the desire steadily stated again and again from community members to have more access to the water, to have more green space, and more experience of the kind of architecture that Darien is famous for. All of those goals, which the community has come forward saying that they value, are achieved by having this island now for the public. Next. So, that's all very exciting, and the question is, so how do we get to this set of shared values, many of which I think have been expressed in all those planning exercises and strategic plans. But the shared values, where and how do we determine them? How do we arrive at the big ideas that give you a coherent vision to invest in going forward? What does that feel like? What does it look like? What are the materials? How do we then take some of those agreements, refine them, and start building? And then once we've built whatever it is that's going to get built, how do you take care of it in a way that's sustainable for your community? And that's where stewardship comes in. And we need to constantly be, as we go together through this process, thinking about this longer term pathway towards stewardship. Your first act of stewardship was acquiring this island for the community. And now we have to take it through all the rest to get it into a long-term condition that you all can take care of together. Next. So, finding a vision, schedule. I think any of you who are here in the room or who are listening know that to get somewhere you have to make a plan. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in the planning path that the committee has elected to put together. Our charge over the next year is to first identify a vision together, and then second, to actually turn that into a very specific and actionable plan where there are projects that can actually be moved ahead with. So the yellow bar that says decision point on this schedule map, that is kind of where we're headed over the next year. I think something that has come up as a goal is if after the access road opens, which we anticipate will be before the end of the calendar year, there is another project, something that could get implemented that would bring everyone a little bit closer to Great Island and give everybody more access to the island. That is what we would consider a quick win. And so we're eager as we move ahead to be thinking about this long-term vision, but also is there something achievable and much faster sort of timeline that we could all agree to together and design and implement relatively quickly. You see, before you advance, sorry, Michelle, at the bottom there, the revenue and cost model. We are aware that one of the things Darien is famous for is the community's ability to think about resources and financial resources with an enormous amount of knowledge and sensitivity. And so I think our sense is that as the plan for physical transformation and access changes for the island, it has to be matched basically step for step by a sound financial or sort of fiscal account of how that plan is going to move ahead. And so there's sort of the big schedule up ahead, but this revenue and cost model, and then you can see in red the regulatory environment, and here we are at Town Hall, but making sure that this whole plan is in accordance with regulations and expectations of the sort of formal part of the community process is also our role together with you.
Rebecca?
Yeah.
Should that be 6 months and 6 months?
It should be,
6
yes,
months.
thank you. Okay, and now, thank you, should I say that louder? Actually, because we did, I think it's helpful, actually, Monica just pointed out that on that slide it said 4 months and 6 months. That is the slide, I think, that we brought last time we met together. As we talked about what would be best for the community, and we understood when people are going to be having holidays or distracted by other parts of their life, we decided to actually extend the schedule to fit more with a sort of typical school year and to give a full year. So the vision process will be effectively fall semester, and the planning process will be spring semester, and then there'll be a wrap-up phase early next summer where the final cost model and plan is sort of tidied up. But basically for everybody who's involved, that seemed like a better schedule for the community than the original one we had proposed. Thank you, Monica. Okay, a different way of looking at this, I feel like, Michelle, I'm going to hand this over to you to walk us through this version of how to think about the process.
Yeah, as Becca had eloquently spoken about, the approvals process, the revenue cost, and all of our design, it's also extremely important for us to engage with the public. This is going to be a public green space, and we want to hear what the community really wants to see. And there will be several different opportunities in various different formats for the public to engage with our design team and all of our sub-consultants through the 2 phases. And we have 3 kind of main approaches to these engagement events, one of which is community workshops. And those will be the bigger celebratory events where we have several hours blocked out with activities to really garner feedback from the community and also share out what we've learned, what we've observed, what we're thinking, and hear what they have to say. And then the second approach is about experiential engagement. So there will be times where we want to garner input from the community, but we may not be on site at all the prime hours of the day that people will be there all the time. Perhaps there's ways we can install creative signage or really creative activities to really engage people as they're visiting the island during its early opening phase. And then the last method is focus group conversations. And those are with targeted key groups in the community, talking about very specific issues with the site or specific topics that people are very interested in, such as conservation, education focus, water sports, things like that. And for each of those approaches, we have kind of tentatively outlined the timing for that. So there will be 4 workshops, one centered on discovery and understanding, and that will be coming up in September, where we'll be sharing out some of our key observations about the site, what we've learned about the topography, the existing architecture, some of the wonderful conservation, ecology, and species that already exist on site, and share that out with the community because we're so excited about the site and we want the community just as excited as us. And then the second workshop will really present some of the vision directions based on the feedback that we get from the first workshop, what we hear from the community, what direction do we feel like they really want to see this project pushed in, and how can we help kind of carry that vision forward. And then of course, during December and January, holiday season, a little bit of a break. And with workshop 3, we'll start presenting out those preliminary ideas that we've been working on from that vision plan, trying to develop some concepts, share that out with the community, and once again get their feedback on that, what they like, what they don't like, and we'll come back to them in May towards the end of master plan and concept and present some more final concepts and another round of really getting their feedback on what they want to see from the park. And then with the experiential engagement, there are a couple of key types of ways that we can engage with people. So one really fun way that our sub-consultant, Atelier Cho Thompson, has worked on various sites is engaging in installations and having these temporary, really fun, maybe art pieces that can draw people to the site as a way perhaps to engage. So that's one option. They've also worked on this interactive signage in New Haven that shows resources, ways to engage with the city, and perhaps the installation of interactive signage on site at Great Island is another way to have people connect with social, website, other things that we'd like to share with the community. And then we did for Franklin Park a Wonder Walk, which is a really interactive activity meant for children, for them to engage and learn about the site and explore with a little bit of a fantasy and a fairy tale spin on it to make it really engaging for younger audiences as well. So we don't want our engagement to be just focused on adults, but also engage communities of all ages and all interests. And there will be 3 experiential engagements. Right now they're tentatively spaced, but I think based on the needs of the community, we will kind of tailor that as well. And then of course the focus group conversations, we would like to have a regular cadence of those and engage with various groups within Darien. If there are, the school board or various other educational institutions that are really interested in how can we provide educational opportunities on site to learn about ecology and learn about the Long Island Sound and the beautiful water systems that are there. That's a really great opportunity to have close listening with those people. Yes?
Would you mind just speaking a little bit more into the microphone? I think some of the people.
Yeah, of course, no worries.
Having a hard time hearing.
Yeah, no problem. And additionally, this is just something we would love to kind of engage with various groups as we work through this analysis and understanding. We'll have a clear idea of who those focus groups are, but we're very open to talking to a wide range of people. And those outreach strategies will all kind of stack up into this cadence of various outreach events, and we want to be continuously engaging the community. And in addition to all of these events and activities, we will also have a social media presence and website, which we are in the process of developing and want to be really transparent and open with the public as we are working through the vision and master plan. Great, and I'll pass it back to Becca.
Thank you. I think actually one of the things we wanted to discuss with you tonight is if we do the Saturday, I think it's the 3rd Saturday in September as the date for our engagement, is that agreeable to the committee? That is it.
I want to make sure Highland is having some event. And
Okay.
I don't know if it's, I just want to make sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was the.
Let me circle back on
Yeah.
that.
So anyway, we have we were, I think basically probably within the next month, we want to lock in that date. But the idea is not to do it right when everyone's starting school, but a little bit later in the month so that hopefully it's a really fun kind of back to school, but not in conflict with the startup of everybody's fall activities.
Which weekend was that? Because the 1st is a Sunday.
It's 22nd.
It would be the 22nd is our current pencil in date if it is workable for everyone. But that's tentative, not published. But
Right.
Was that a Sunday or a Saturday?
it's a Saturday,
Okay, I think that's the 21st.
21st. Okay. But we think a Saturday is probably better than a Sunday, just putting it out there. And we thought because of how busy it is and we want to appeal to lots of different people, we were thinking of potentially a morning activity and an afternoon activity. So it could work for multiple schedules. That's an idea.
Right.
So we're looking forward to getting feedback on if that really is the best for the community.
Like that would be a workshop or?
It would be a workshop. In fact, the way we're thinking of it, it would also involve some experiential, and we're looking to have actually part of it potentially at Town Hall so that it's easy to get to and there's good parking, and then we're seeking a way to get some transportation so there could also be experiences on the island. So that's the recipe, but as we're all just starting out, the mechanics, as we know, of actually getting people to the island are not straightforward, and we want to make sure that everybody gets to participate. So we're thinking it's a real sort of both and solution. So town hall and the island and morning and afternoon workshop and experience. That's the goal. And I think,
you know what, we can do bus. We did it before. We can do it again.
I think our sense is that the more, you've said this before, Monica, but the more people get on the island, the more likely we're going to have everyone arrive at a shared understanding and excitement about the future more quickly. So we really love the idea of getting people to be on the island if we can. I think again and again you'll hear us try and find ways to get as many people there as possible.
And I think one of the challenges has been getting people on the island, despite it being open. It's not necessarily open. Accessible for a cross-section of the community.
Exactly.
For various reasons.
Exactly. So, and as we're going to talk about possible futures now, but I think that one, other than outreach itself, the one thing we thought we might make a little bit of time to talk about together today is access and how we sort of take that on, because I think access is actually the #1 challenge with the island. So we'll return to that in a little bit. Okay, let's talk if there are there any other questions actually? This maybe.
Is the idea before that September meeting, would we be preparing stuff ahead
Yes.
of time in terms of potential plans and so forth?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think just to share, so we always begin our process with what we call discovery and analysis. And the reason that we do that is there's a lot of homework that we want to do, and you all have a lot of knowledge, but we need to learn as much as you, and if we can, more than you. And it's great. I know Craig is on Zoom, but having Redness and Mead's participation, given their history with the island, is going to definitely speed us along in our knowledge. But so this first phase is trying to bring forward different highlights and conditions about the island. And then we'll basically, as part of the analysis, we'll say, well, look, if you want to preserve this condition, it means you're limited in where you can put roads or where you can have certain kinds of activities, programs that you might want to have. So the choices will be already emergent for that September meeting. And possible futures, we thought we would just return to some of the ways that we were talking with you before. So if you advance to the next slide, we had shared with the committee as part of the process of understanding what might be the right path for Great Island, that there are kind of two tempting directions that maybe seem a little bit at odds, and that I think in some ways we'll be seeking to reconcile. And one is this sort of idea of returning to nature and really enhancing and encouraging all the different species, plants, life on the island that is actually non-human. And so that this is really an opportunity to really encounter the wild and nature close to home in Darien. There's also another sort of tempting path forward, which we were calling the estate for all. And that's this idea of sort of opening the doors of these historic, beautiful buildings and really giving everyone a taste of what it feels like to be on such a great terrace, and imagining stables for one's own use. I mean, there's a sort of amazing fantasy, but also realization of just how magnificent it is to live in a space like this. And so how do we make this sort of everyone's home as another possible direction? If you go to the next slide. So thinking about, I think that other image is sort of nice. Return to nature. This is a project that we worked on a while ago in a wetland in Massachusetts. And it's a very, very large wetland that basically, because it was regulated, nobody could access. And we talked with all the folks in conservation about how one of the problems sometimes with nature is that if nobody sees it, nobody values it. So one of the most powerful things actually in terms of sort of advocacy for nature is bringing people into contact with nature. And so we worked really closely with a number of different ecologists and regulatory agencies on this project to find a way to do no damage to the temperature of the water, to the plants, to the fish, to anything, but to bring people really close to understanding what the wetland was. And it's sort of a bold gesture just because of the length. It's a half-a-mile long boardwalk, but very, very low impact, and yet incredibly beautiful and transformative for everyone who's ever been there. Next. So I think, we thought this is sharing just an existing condition where one of the real lowlands on the island at the moment is a lawn, and there's an old carriage house, which I know just had its roof problem. And you can see in the distance the White House that has that historic sort of part of it at its core. And then we were saying, well, is there a way to imagine even just this location, if you go to the next slide, where we've adapted it for education, we've reduced sort of where the amount of pavement, so it's much more suited for pedestrians and it's maintainable. We've introduced the idea of pollinators and a pollinator walk. Potentially, if education around boating becomes part of this, is there a way to have a kayak launch that takes advantage of how low it is there and that sometimes it's wet? I think the idea that there's some kind of woodland trail that expands off of the kind of, feels like a carriage track that's there now is interesting. There are a lot of phragmites in the tidal marshes, and so really beginning to take on that invasive pressure. And then is there a way to modestly restore the historic structure so that you don't sort of see what feels like a pretty typical suburban house looming over you, where there's actually hidden within that structure maybe a quite lovely historic building. But that would be really bringing a lot more nature up to the benefit of people as one possible vision. We go on. And then we thought, taking forward this idea of maybe an estate for all, like sometimes it's just allowing people to bring their chairs or even having chairs and really being able to spend time on a lawn and having a safe, accessible path, as long as we can get people to the island, which admittedly is a challenge. If we go to the next slide. So this is a vantage point I think many of you have seen, maybe not everybody, because I think we were sort of off the path with permission to take this photo. But this is what it's like now. And then we thought of interest potentially, go to the next slide. So some of it is literally just activating it with people and events that will get people onto this lawn. But if we could expand that terrace in a way so that it scissors down and steps down, then it becomes an accessible condition. Even if you don't open up the building, there's a way that that experience of being sort of a guest up high, looking out over the water, becomes accessible and expanded for everybody. And really a lot of things on the island have sort of not been taken care of recently. I'm not actually, there's a lot of care going into the island, and so I want to be careful about how I say that, but a fair amount of the vegetation around the buildings is quite overgrown, and so a lot of there's things that you want to see when you're up in a position like that you can't see right now. So just some editing seems pretty desirable. And then something we're going to be looking at really closely is how to introduce a coastal walk and how that walk can be safe, but really connect people to the water. Next. So we thought we could break for a little discussion right now. And then we did bring as an activity potentially some discussion around parking and some scale comparisons, which we had a very brief conversation about when we last met. But if there's time, we could spend a little bit of time talking about how, if we want to get parking on the island, how would we start to think about how that might work or might not work. Does anyone have any comments?
Where are we starting?
Yeah, I'm going to stop. So,
tell us a little bit about what happens with the results of all these engagement exercises, and if there are any other avenues described beyond those 12 events that we're going to have as an open channel for getting the public's input.
That's a great question. Thank you. So we will be launching a website, and I think we'll probably have like a beta version to test with you in our next meeting together. And I think the hope is that it will go fully live probably like a week before this September engagement. And I think our hope is that we'll have these live interactive exchanges, but we'll also have a digital sort of process and presence. And something we found to be very useful is to have surveys, which we're not working with like a polling agency or anything. So there's, I think, a lot of the way that we take in this information is sort of careful, thorough, methodical interpretation. And we'll share with you the results. I think the more people who participate and fill out surveys and engage in the activities, the better our process will be. So we are hopeful. We've had good results in our other public projects with really getting people to engage. But basically, we'll log in what all the responses are. We'll bring them to you, and we'll say our understanding based on this feedback is that this number of people really care about this. This number really care about this. We showed this drawing, everybody hated it. We showed this drawing, and even though it had no overlap with any of these things people say they care about, everybody said that's what I want. And we'll sort of bring, and that, it's interesting with design, that happens a lot, because I think people are really good at understanding what they know and what they see. It can be very hard for people to imagine something that isn't immediately before them. And one of our jobs with you is to say, this is a future that you can't yet see, but we're going to try and spell it out and make it visible so that people can imagine what that future could be. And we found that when we do that, sometimes communities surprise us and surprise themselves when they can see something that they didn't imagine before.
Do you have sort of a sample or a draft of like what that survey would look like? Because I think in a situation like this, what you ask for input on, whether it be from cost or to, the state setting or nature, I think that's very important in terms of the type of feedback that we get. And I think is the idea that you would start to get that out before that September 21 weekend?
So that's a great question. We have found that generally we don't like to open surveys until we've had a chance to share the information, and that there is, like underneath this drawing, we have a map of the topography of the island. It has the FEMA lines on it. I think it's very, generally, I think it's a little bit like giving someone a quiz before you have them read the assignment or the teacher discussed it. I think for us, we like to be able to stand up and say, we have questions for all of you about the trees on the island. We want to share with you, there are 79 species of plants, 30 kinds of trees, mostly there are these 3 species. We could plant a lot more, we could plant a lot. Anyway, we have questions. So in our experience, we would rather share our basic understanding and then launch the survey. And that's how it's worked best for us in the past.
Well, to that point, I think it's important before people start talking about parking to understand some of the consequences and topography and things like that. I don't think, everyone realizes that once you get past the traffic circle, you've got wetlands, lowlands where you can't possibly put parking.
Yes.
And then as you go off to the right, there's a big, huge hill with the greenhouse sits on top of her. You can't put any parking there. There's some availability maybe by the stables on the left side, but then you're letting cars deeper into the island, and then you've got the consequences of what happens if you let cars deeper into the island and how it ruins the experience possibly for people that want the environmental quiet, back to nature feel. And so people need to think about that before they just say, hey, I want to be able to drive to the beach at the end of the island or something like that.
That's why, I think we can think more about this question, and are there some questions that we could ask without doing a sort of intro or primer? But yeah, I think if you understand that there's a lot that's already protected on the island that we can't change, that no one here has the power to change, I think that's really important. You basically want to set the ground rules of what is actually possible and then make choices within what is allowable. So
I think that's maybe why it's beginning to think about what we're going to be asking. Because it's July now, and then August, and then this meeting in September. Just in terms of what we're going to be asking people to give us feedback on. I'm sure that could be like an open feedback question, but I think we probably want to pick like 10 different areas where we want to.
So I think we were thinking that focusing on conservation, focusing on educational activities and options, focusing on access, those were the 3 things that came forward as most pressing to us. And then if we have the information, and I'm not sure we're confident we're going to have enough information at that point, but if we have some sense of what architectural preservation might cost for each of the structures, I think we could have that conversation, but we want to be sure before we start talking about futures for the architecture, we're grounding them in knowledge about costs. Because as we probably all experienced, you say, I want to like redo my kitchen, and then you get the bids for your kitchen, and it's like so much more, and then everybody always says, well, things even always cost more in real life than what the original estimate is. So when it comes to the number of structures you have here and the costs involved in taking care of them and changing them, we want to be very careful for that. So if we're ready to do some of that in September, we would even start to talk about architectural preservation and change.
How do you do that without knowing what the purpose of the structures that you're maintaining or keeping is?
Well, so one of the things we'll be starting with, and that actually we're kicking off now, is an existing conditions evaluation of the structures so that we know what their current condition is, because that gives us a sort of baseline for their future. And that's a little bit what we'll be doing with this site.
But
too.
don't each of the structures have to have a purpose in order to stay?
To really understand the future costs, yes, but just to understand where they are now, yes, I think to stay, they will need a purpose. Yeah, and defining what those, what each purpose is something that we'll be doing together as a community.
The other side of costs is potential funding or revenue. The events that you put up there seem pretty community focused, which I agree is most important, but a lot of the discussion in the past has been identifying stakeholders. When does that start, and how do you marry that up with the community involvement?
So we're going to be starting to identify stakeholders in the next month. And at our next actually meeting with you all, we're going to bring back the same group that we had at the interview. And so one of those, part of that team is James Lima and folks. And so they're kind of critical to understanding that sort of governance and revenue set of futures for the island. Yeah. But I think it seems to me that we could have perhaps a draft set of those questions for when we next meet, and we can evaluate them and see if they seem right, and if there are any that we could get out a little bit earlier, or if there's any early message we could deliver before we have the workshop. That seems possible to me.
So Becca, the workshop idea, it's a new concept for me. So you talked about 2 different events, or 2 different times, and you talked about 2 different locations.
Yeah.
Is there a reason that we wouldn't just have both events at the stables? That's one question. And then 2, what does the workshop actually look like? The only workshop I know is my grandfather's with a lot of tools. I'm sure that's not what this is about.
That was such a good question. That is not. No, it's more like a super participatory. So maybe a little bit more like a science fair.
Okay.
Something where there are a bunch of different tables and activities, and you can kind of wander around, and depending on your interests, or there's something for you. And if you're someone who doesn't want to learn anything, but you love to do something, there's like a walk you can go on, or a game, a sort of more playful component. So basically, most likely the workshop, there'll be a short presentation of sort of some basic findings about the island. And then we'll have different stations, we call them, little activity zones. And one of them is likely to be about ecology and conservation and sort of learning about like the birds and things like that, the water. Another is likely to be about the architecture and the history of the island. I think a third might be about what kinds of activities people are interested in, doing, and how those might fit onto the island, because there are some activities that people have suggested that I think, Dan, like you were saying, when you actually map on the infrastructure or requirements for those activities, don't seem to make much sense for the island. That'll be another station. I think we will have additionally a station devoted to access, and how do we get people to the island, and what does that mean? And so there'll be sort of all these different stations for people to learn from. The question about why not just do it on the island, I think we would love to do it just on the island if we feel like we can really get everybody to the island and we can communicate that effectively with enough time for people to plan, then that works. I think we want to make sure that no one is, we want everyone included. And I think there's something about town hall, which is really obvious for a community event. And everybody sort of knows that it's hard to get to Great Island. So we were thinking, at least for this first one, if we combine it, there's an easy way on, and then it's more of an adventure to go to Great Island, and people can do that too. But if you just want to make sure your voice is heard, you can pull up, you can come for half an hour, and you've engaged, and you've sort of done your part. So we don't want to make it, I think, it's often called like a barrier to entry. We want to overcome any barriers for people participating in this process if we possibly can.
And do we have like a size limit?
We don't have a size limit, and I think something that we've tentatively talked about that's worth sharing with this group is the idea of actually using the stables, and there's that like beautiful court in front of the stables if it's a beautiful day, but we can move into the stables if it's not nice weather and we need protection, and that's quite a roomy and safe environment too. So that seemed like a really beautiful location to do something for the community on the island. Any more questions?
There would be perhaps some experiential with that. But again,
In fact, just even being at the stables
that's
is
what I'm
experiential,
thinking.
right? Yeah.
Just getting to it.
People want to get in that building.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for people to be able to give like good feedback, a little bit to Dan's point, they need to understand this is what it looks like, this is where there might be a conservation easement, this is where there may be wetlands, so like the kind of mechanics of it. I think we also people need to sort of see and touch what's out there, because there's a lot of things like in terms of understanding what shape the house is in, what the beach looks like down there. It's not Todd's point, but I think for people to actually get down there and see what that looks like, I think we'll probably get better feedback.
That's what I think for us, we always want to marry the natural world with the community's desires, but you have to know both. And I think you guys have good tools for knowing your community, but this is a really particular place and people haven't been able to get to know it. So we want to get people knowing it as fast as possible. So yeah, we've talked about, can we do like a system of site walks that are just running through all these, just in terms of, that would be part of the, and do we have captains sort of, Monica is a clear candidate for giving some great tours of the island, proven tour guide. Yeah, so that's how we're thinking about it. Okay, any more on this subject? Should we talk a little bit more about access itself?
Yes.
Okay, so this map is just an area of the island. Might make sense for people to even stand up. And I think you can see that there's a lot of woods. There's like a cleared lawn, the beach that you just mentioned. And then there's the ring, that's been cleared. It's down low with the docks and the boathouse. Then sort of there's another clearing which you mentioned might make a great sort of gatehouse or welcome center right as you come onto the island, in the stables. But pretty much everything else is either wetland or woods. When you look at it this way, everything looks totally flat. And that's super deceptive. But it's very helpful for detail and plans. So we thought the next drawing to look at together is just bringing forward the elevation difference. So the dark blue is the sound. And then this sort of turquoise line that goes around, that's the FEMA flood line. And so it's interesting to see that a place that is clearly potentially great for community events or even for a rare large event, maybe even temporary parking, this big lawn is within the flood zone, right? So in terms of the future, this is a sort of no-build zone and potentially has some risk as it relates to what water does in a big rain event or storm.
Is it still potentially temporary parking?
I think this potentially is a wonderful location for temporary parking. We work at Tanglewood, as you know, and sort of being able to park on lawn every once in a while can be very useful. So if there was a larger community event, this is a very obvious place, if the weather is good, to be able to put some cars.
Regulations don't preclude it.
Regulations don't
Okay.
preclude it. I don't think we would ever advise to make it a permanent parking
Understood.
because it is going to want to be wet.
Does anybody know how often it is wet and would be unusable for parking? Is it after any rainstorm, or is it after extremely heavy
One of
rain?
the things that we need to probe and find out a little bit more about. One of the things that you can see, though, is that in terms of the high points, those are the areas where it's sort of this is level, and then these sort of pale areas are the only other kind of real level areas on the island. So there are not a lot of areas that are level enough to be able to make a parking lot. And some of those areas, like right around the manor house, are very high visibility, and if you were to put a lot of cars there, sort of, I think many people would say, but we'll ask this question, like, you invested in this great asset that connects you to the water and to nature. Why are you putting a parking lot in the front of the most beautiful piece of land almost in the state? So we thought, just as we are talking about acknowledging getting people to the island, the easiest way to do that is for them to use their cars or to come by car and then to park here. There are not a lot of straightforward places to build parking on the island.
Rebecca,
Yeah.
is this where the statues are?
Yes.
It is, okay.
Yes,
I was
this
looking
is
at
the
this.
beautiful, yeah. And I mean, I think something that we'll be looking at closely together too is some of the most stunning moments on the property are sort of kissing flooding zones, like the beach house and the changing rooms, or that terrace that you just mentioned, the boathouse, the dock. Those are all in that flood zone. And so that's going to be one of those things that we have to think very carefully about as we think about the future of those structures and conditions.
Do you have this map that shows sort of the high tide?
I think we do. We didn't bring it today, but we've looked at that. And that's probably like for the workshop when we have water as one of our topics, right? Looking at that, we can show sort of different tides and storm tide.
Yeah, I think Pear Tree, they did a great analysis that showed certain areas and how many days per year, like high tides or whatever, it would flood.
Yeah.
That may be helpful for that location down there.
Yeah, and we could show maybe 100-year storm, 500-year storm, and then we could also show how often those storms are actually happening, because we all know we're
I'm
getting
curious what it
500.
looked like at Superstorm Sandy.
Yeah.
What did this look like? Ned would know, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
somebody.
but Ned said that this actually didn't flood.
Or even last night at high tide.
Yeah.
Yeah, this weekend.
Yeah.
You could,
So
did you-
I think the how water behaves on the island and in the sound around the island is one of the things we most need to understand, and sort of as quickly as possible. I think something that struck us when we looked at this is you almost effectively have two islands in terms of what water wants to do, and so how does that become something that we can all delight in rather than worry about or be vexed by? So then, stepping back a little bit. Thanks, Michelle. We thought it would be useful, sort of high level, to look at walkability. And so if this is Great Island, where I'm putting my hand, many people who go there now, when Pear Tree Point Beach parking lot isn't full, will park here. They'll walk 25 minutes, and they can get onto the island. If you want to walk from where we are tonight, it's a roughly 35-minute walk. If you come from the train station, it gets further and further afield. And so I guess our sense is that walking to the island is not going to be for everybody. It's not sort of a practical solution for getting access. The bus stop possibility is an interesting direction, I think, and the idea of potentially having a shuttle that loops continuously is something that we'll want to look at, so that there are some regular stops that just this you can jump on and then jump off, and then there's no parking pressure if we do that. There's just public transportation to the island, and that's something we're going to be looking at. There's also been a request to look at, is there a way to take a ferry to Great Island? And I think the question that comes out sounds incredibly fun. Is there any way to make coming by boat cost effective as a kind of public transportation idea? So those are questions that we'll be looking at, and I think, you know, Kip, to what you're saying, like, if we want to come by boat, that's an amazing way to see Great Island. What's the revenue model for having something like that actually work? And then we thought we would return to just the sort of scale comparison, and I think to sort of look at Waveney Park in its size and Todd's Point in its size next to Great Island. And we didn't do, we're very proud and we think Great Island seems enormous and great, but it is actually quantifiably quite a bit smaller than either Todd's Point or Waveney Park. And when you start to look at the scale of like the large parking lot at Todd's Point on Great Island, you start to see that there's almost an absurdity in the exercise of making a large parking lot, like one contiguous parking lot on Great Island. So something we'll be testing for you all is, if we wanted to look at distributing parking, where might we distribute it? I think there's an exercise, I don't know, Michael, if you have those little cutouts of parking.
Yeah, they're quite small.
I know, they're like, then they want to move around, but just looking at some of the places where they're flats, like for instance where the root cellar is, by that is an already disturbed site. It's been leveled. It feels as though it's not too hard, potentially, to imagine some parking right as you come onto the island. I think that addresses, Dan, something you were getting at, which is get people out of their cars. So is there even, yeah.
Is that over there? What's that area?
Yeah, that's the greenhouse right there.
Yeah, so if we wanted, for instance, to put sort of 40 spaces right here.
That's 40.
Yeah. That, like in terms of like a starting place, that is probably relatively low impact, would get people out of their cars quickly, is some parking. It's a very modest amount of parking compared to a lot of other public spaces, but it would address an accessibility need. Thank you.
No, it's okay.
I think we can also show, this is 60 spaces, right? So
I'm sorry, is that where the root cellar is now?
it is,
Yeah.
yeah.
Now, what's behind there? That area there?
Behind the house.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's another relatively level area. Yeah. And I think you get into a question, I mean, I think these are things that we'll be looking at, right? Which is, do you want to ring a place in parking? Or is there just one place that we ring in parking? But I think what you can start to see, there's also something that I think we'll look at is the stable, the sort of structure part of the stables is feels incredibly meaningful architecturally, but the ring behind, which is effectively a butler building, has also been leveled, is accessible and not in a view shed, right? So there's a way that you can get probably around 60 parking spaces if you were, for instance, to convert that to parking. So between those two moves, it starts to seem not like a nightmare to get probably around 100 spaces on Great Island. And I think to your point that if we find that the open ring is also usable, if it's not too wet for temporary use, that's another about 200 spaces. So, but that would be, I think, exceptional use. Anyway, we'll be looking at this all a lot more carefully, I think, for our next conversations with you and for the public meetings. But I think as a starting point, just to share with you all, our sense is that it is relatively achievable to get around 100 spaces as a kind of baseline. There are some sacrifices, like then not expanding, and there are revenue consequences potentially. Maybe actually there's a lot of meaning of having a larger building here where the covered indoor ring is as part of the stables. So do you want parking more than you want that expansion
event
of that
space
building?
or
Right,
something like that.
right. So I think, there are always going to be trade-offs for these, but we wanted to just show you that in terms of an immediate concern, which is how do people get here? There are solutions. There are some parking solutions. We don't think we're going to ever have 600 or 700 parking spaces, and even getting upward of 250 is going to be very, very challenging for Great Island. So I think we'll be sort of trying to test what's possible there.
But the other impact that this decision makes is what happens with the roads.
Yes.
So if you have parking here, for instance, then you have that loop around the half the island. If you have it just here, you could widen the road just to this point and have parking there and there without screwing up that side of the island at all.
Yeah.
But this does a good job of hiding the parking behind the buildings as well.
Yep.
How much of the island can you not put parking because it's wetlands or otherwise
I
protected?
don't know that statistic, but that's a great question, and why don't we have an answer for you for our next conversation?
For frame of reference, how much parking is here at Pear Tree? Do you know?
200.
200?
How many spots are there?
Just roughly, yeah, over here. At Pear Tree.
213.
213.
I didn't, I counted
Approximately.
today.
Well, does anybody think we're gonna need more parking at the island than we do at
That's what I was
Pear
kind
Tree
of.
Point or
I
Weed
think
Beach?
it's gets to usage.
Yeah, it will be
Right.
tied to
How
you,
many
so
different-
I can share with you, I don't know, if there's a restaurant or a school, kind of, some kind of education facility, or, I know someone even threw out the idea of a hotel, right? Like they're standard recipes, if you pursue those, for how many spaces you need for a use. And I think honestly, actually, there's certain uses that will get disqualified because the island cannot support the amount of parking you would need to support that use.
Is that something you think you'll be prepared to talk about in September?
Yes.
Give some parameters?
Yes, we can
Okay.
set, I think just to share a little bit more about the analysis and discovery phase, this is the phase where we try and arrive at all the parameters, and we try and distill what are like useful conversations to have together as a community, and which are conversations that like the analysis shows are like sort of not sensible in any way for most people, and so we don't need to spend people's energy talking about them or researching them any further.
I mean, I think there's some things some community members may have in their mind that may just get knocked out, and it's better just to quickly say, doesn't really work for the site.
Yeah, and these are
like
these are the four reasons why.
So,
Right. I mean, yes, I can imagine suggesting a pool. It's teaching to swim. It's on island. It seems very logical, but there is not a good place to put a pool here. I mean, I think, but we can anticipate that as a question and like show what that would mean and why that's probably very difficult.
So some of those parameters might actually be helpful at our next meeting ahead of September. You mentioned September, but.
Yeah.
I think
Not
August,
all of them.
no, but totally. I feel like our August conversation should be a little bit of a preview of some of the things that we want to take for a much larger conversation with the community in September. And if there are things that this group can sort of say, actually, that's already kind of nuts based on what you just shared with us, then we take them off the table and they go into kind of appendix. If there's someone who comes, we can say, well, this is the work we did about that, but that's why we haven't broadcast it.
I think we need that, Becca. I think that the no question is going to be a dumb question.
Yeah.
So no matter, even if Palin wants to put a Ferris wheel there, we're going to have a reason for why we're not doing it.
It's only fair. I agree with you.
Right?
Yeah.
But we have to be able to address every one of those.
Yeah. Another thing that comes up is beach, because there is a wee bit of a beach. But again, what does that look like? I mean, I had somebody say to me, with Great Island, nobody will go to the beach anymore anyway. I'm like, not sure I agree with that concept. But, there's some feeling that, people will have this, and is this a reasonable, true, beach spot? or not. I mean, right now it's very can it be expanded, things like that, I think is something people are going to want to
There's a
understand
little one
too.
over here somewhere too.
Yeah.
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 And then is
what
there a
does that look
lifeguard
like?
with each one, and
Right.
what's the cost of the amount of
Right.
town employees you need to
And again,
have
parking,
for each one
because-
of these little?
So how would you suggest, I mean, we begin to kind of funnel our, the concepts that we want to explore, or maybe the concepts that we want to weed out,
Yeah.
sort of to be a little more organized on our August meeting, because it's then August and then September.
I think it'd be very useful if together we arrive at the preferred agenda, and if there are specific futures that you want us to have already considered for that meeting, I think if you can share them with Monica, and then we can start preparing. So that
Do you
we
have a
the
list of
conversation.
potential
We do.
futures that?
Yeah.
Because I'm just thinking, if you've got a list of possibilities,
Mhm.
Ferris wheel, swimming pool.
That wasn't
and
actually
all
on our
that.
list, just to be fully
And
transparent.
it's not Jim's idea either. I'm just gonna take that back.
If you do that, then people, is that one of the things that you do during the workshops or the community outings, is have people say yes or no to each of, kind of vote on them, on that list of things?
Yeah, and sometimes
And get
we'll
some
ask.
sense of what they like and what they don't.
We did
Well,
that
to
when we did
prioritize.
the Parks Master Plan back in 17, 18, and we had a big event. It was here in Town Hall, and it was packed evening. And there were different, opportunities, and this was for the whole town, so it's like, a walking path, a pool, a this, a that, all the sort of different amenities that people might want recreationally, and they're on boards, and people were each given like 10 colored sticky notes. And you literally ran and said, yeah, I want this, and you just totally want a town pool, you could put all 10 of your sticky notes on that, or you could spread them, but you could see how people are like, which sort of, amenities and
They were
recreational
favoring.
resources, the community and the participants were really, keenest on. But the risk is you don't want people all coming back again and voting on a town pool when we know that won't
It's not
work.
feasible,
So
yeah.
I think the options put out there would have to be things that were at least reasonably
Yeah.
possible.
And I think kind of going into that survey, it's probably helpful for them to understand, like, well, this is why we may want to have a nature trail,
Yes.
right? And give them the rationale behind it, and this is why we're not suggesting a heliport, right? Like, I think beginning to understand why we're focused on some of the things that we are,
Yeah.
and why we're not asking for input on certain other things, I think will be,
Helpful,
yeah.
yeah,
I think
agreed.
that's why the presentation component of the workshop will be so important to kind of set those ground truths for everyone and really get everyone on the same page and understand what our parameters are.
Now, something that hasn't been talked about much is the water itself. And that, I'm just wondering about, people are gonna want boating opportunities, right? More moorings in town or something like that? Does that come up at all as an issue that we should be entertaining?
but I'm sure it will.
I think there's moorings, and then there's increased dockage,
Yeah.
and so.
And then I think there's also community boating. So I think there's sort of private boating for people who have boats and are skilled. And then I think there are people who are maybe interested in learning about boating or don't have a boat but would like to come to Great Island and potentially be able to kayak or get out onto the water. So I think the boating and the water component is a big part of unlike the Ferris wheel or the heliport, something we really want to look closely at.
I could see access by water being a very big topic, whether it be paddleboard, kayak, boat.
Yep.
But then we're gonna have to think about all the safety issues surrounding
Right.
that now. That's
Yes.
for those of us who actively boat in Zigglers.
The same issues we have.
Very crowded, very dangerous.
Yeah, weed, right?
This came
Yeah,
up with
we
the
actually have those issues.
Advisory Coastal Commission now and I've witnessed it myself, is because the outlets public, people are swimming across Ziegler's Cove to climb on so you got the climbing on the rocks,
Very aware of that.
but also they're swimming across Ziegler's, which is really, really dangerous.
Where are they swimming from to?
So, we don't have the big
From the
map
road,
here,
right?
but,
Climbing up the
so,
rocks
we've got all
and
the,
jumping.
the moorings, the
Yeah.
privately owned moorings, but people do, or people anchor. But now as they're jumping up and they're swimming across, but the problem is they're coming in, you're driving a boat or whatever, and you've got this little tiny head. I mean, this happened to me a few weeks ago. And my husband was driving, and I was up on the bow getting a line to type with somebody else, and all of a sudden I looked up, and there was like a little head in the, just right there, and
Well, I think there is,
So
in
it is-
general, there is a lot of swimming.
There is a lot of swimming there.
Already, but I agree that we do have a problem now.
People are now swimming.
And jumping.
They have a destination now.
So we
Right,
are
so
putting
people
up
now,
signs.
where you historically would more just tend to kind of swim around their own boat, they're swimming all the way across. So you've
To
got.
where?
To get to climb on the rocks.
Right here?
Yeah.
I thought they were swimming in here.
So this is the dock, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, they're climbing, they're climbing right
So
The
they're
ball through
climbing
there.
on all these
Right
rocks,
here.
yeah.
Any more than they did in the
I
last
think-
20 years?
Yeah.
So, but here, I mean, as you know, Jim, because you boat in here, the boats you tend to drive in this way, but, certain, I was in, so there was some like kids on a boat here, so we're driving in like this, and a kid is like literally swimming or like kind of, so you're coming in and that can vary, especially later in the day when you got the western sun, right? It's, and they talk about the coastal commission and the police said, I think they're ready, says you almost now have to have a lookout, like on the bow, because there's just so many more people just
Although I
swimming.
don't think that's necessarily the charge of this committee.
No, it's
That's
not, but
not
you
gonna
think
prevent
then
swimming
We're
if
in
gonna
you,
talk
sinkers,
about that
right?
later.
but if you
Anyway.
add in then kayaking, paddleboarding, et cetera, we have to be thinking about that from a safety.
See, I think safety is
Standpoint.
a big issue, yes.
Have you been involved with the project where preponderance of the visitors to a site arrive via a shuttle or public transportation, or involved in a plan that entailed setting up such a service?
We, by preponderance.
Well, I don't know if I'm talking about a majority, a significant
Anyway,
number of
yes,
people. If
yeah,
we're capped
so-
at 200 and.
So
We're actively working right now
Yeah.
at Storm King, just to show, because I'm like super
like
enmeshed.
maybe something to look at in Greenwich, for example, there's an island that Greenwich
Yes,
owns.
thank
It's
you.
only accessible by public ferry, or you can kind of reserve a limited individual boat access, but maybe to understand like how many people visit that island, how
Yeah.
many residents visit that island.
I think that's a great
The weekend.
suggestion, and that's a known neighbor, basically, to this. We have found that just at Storm King, they have a bus, they have like a free day, right? And it works. Well, it works, well, I don't know.
It was
It's been
just there
working well.
Saturday.
Were you there and it
And
didn't
it
work
doesn't
for you?
work.
Oh, no,
It
okay.
doesn't work, and that's what, I was there a month before,
Yeah.
and I thought, how is that gonna work?
Yeah.
And I was just there Saturday, and I was like, doesn't work.
Did you
But-
take the bus or?
Yeah, I had, anyway, but I'm interrupting your meeting, and I'm not supposed to, but I would love to talk to you afterwards.
Okay, so they bring people from Newburgh and from your city on a bus, and the schedule is known, and that's been a very popular way for people to get to Storm King. Many people want to come by car, and that has historically been how people get there, but increasingly that offering is very popular and like fully booked, and so it's been something that they've been increasing the use of. Anyway, I think we can come up with basically benchmarks or alternatives where that dominant mode is used, or even just if it's 50-50, right? I mean, I think there are many recipes that could be successful for Great Island.
Becca, how many, you're putting in 600 more spaces at Storm King?
Yeah, I think it's 680.
And how many did you have already? Do you remember?
That is a good question. It was very variable, and they have used so many different modes of parking, so I can't answer that question. It's constantly fluctuating.
Because even with the bus being successful, you're still adding a lot of parking.
There's a lot of parking. It was distributed everywhere. I don't think we need to spend too much time on Storm King itself, but I think if you have a destination that's super desirable, and particularly if it's a place people are only wanting to come in set hours, like if most people want to come to Great Island on Saturday, between 10 a.m. and 2, you can have a lot of pressure in that. And like if you were to design parking for that, you might want 500 spaces. I also think the other thing about Great Island is it's really, really beautiful, and so many, many people want to come here. And if you pave the whole thing, it might become full, but I think you destroy the thing that everybody celebrates about it. So I think we have to get the balance of how parking is achieved and how access is achieved, so it works for as many people on the island as possible.
On that point, you know, you talked about the people swimming, but a lot of people kayak and paddleboard, which they're doing it everywhere else around here. To not have it here seems almost absurd, frankly.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
The other beaches have it, it being paddleboarding and kayaking access.
But the problem will be getting your kayak off your car, which is out there, to a launch point, which is down here.
The beaches is where you launch. Currently, most people launch.
I understand, but here on Great Island,
Well, the beach is right down in.
But I think most likely you might launch from Pear-Tree
have
or
them
from
down
Weed.
there where you could
Right.
rent them.
Yeah,
Like, if
or
they're
have it
on
on site.
yeah, but
Well, I think
people-
having kayak rental on site seems like a relatively desirable, probably quite crowd-pleasing possible feature that does not do a lot of environmental damage. So of the sort of possible even early wins, that could be something that we investigate. I think there's a lot of benefit for the community in pursuing that.
We do that at Weed now.
Yeah.
Yep.
And we can learn from, I mean, I think we're hoping to learn from some of the successful programs you already have too.
You do Pear-Tree too.
So, Becca, because I don't want to keep you all night. So, going back to the survey questions, we've had people reach out with different ideas. And would it be helpful to start, I'll just start funneling them
Yes,
to you?
please.
And we can start an FAQ, this is why this will work, this is why it might not work?
Yes.
Okay, so the community can continue to send those in, okay.
Yes, and you will send them
I
on to
will
us.
send them to you,
Yes.
yes.
Great.
Right, so just so I understand, so right now we're talking about an idea phase to be followed by a vetting phase, whether or not those ideas come from us or are generated after the initial community involvement. Like when I hear, oh, well, you know, it might be great to do kayaks down there. That's great, and we don't need to discuss yet. Oh, well, they're gonna have to, you know, carry them down, or you know what, there are too many kids swimming in the water now. I mean, or something like that. But just to get, you know, those ideas, because I think your presentation is excellent in the sense that it emphasizes access, and that's the low hanging fruit. Get people on that island. Get people on with their dogs on that island. Get people on that island and not have them restricted to, you know, the roadways. And then I think the community can get a sense of what this can be, and when they're then later told, well, can't be this, they won't be frustrated because they'll have been on the island. They can say, oh yeah, there is a, you know, wetland, or that doesn't make sense. But they never get to that point unless they get there with some unfettered access.
So I think, Mike, it's Jim, what you're saying, I think, is ahead of trying to engage them with feedback, whether it be a survey or workshops or so forth. We need to get them on a little bit more on and around the island.
Precisely, Jim.
I agree with that. It's hard to give any sort of constructive input until you're there.
Yeah, and it looks flat. I mean, I think that's why we wanted to sort of start, like, if you're just doing your due diligence and you look on Google, it looks like a flat island, so it seems like anything could be possible. And I think when you get there, you discover part of the reason it's so beautiful is it's almost like Acadia National Park or something. It's super rocky.
Yeah.
Well, we're saying that, but is that feasible? I don't, how does that happen?
So Becca, I think currently what Mike's kind of referring to is that maybe somebody can trace their finger, but when you come on, there's one sort of circular path that you're able to walk on.
Yeah.
Well, not even that, yeah,
Yeah, you
and
go
come back. You can't
Yeah,
necessarily
so-
explore off the path.
Yeah.
So I think the question is if people, that would involve a little bit of a role change, sort of opening up access, the initial access, to give people a little bit more ability to discover and see what else is out there.
This whole path here.
Yeah.
There's,
It's
I can't remember
close.
where it goes, it's, yeah. But that gives you a real different perspective than,
Yeah.
Right. I only walked that for the first time last Friday. Other members of my team had a chance to walk it before.
It's completely different than that part of the walk.
It's completely different. And I will just say, as something that we'll bring forward, I think having these different experiences on a small island is amazing and something that should be preserved.
Exactly.
I think if people don't walk on that sort of southeast corner of the island, then they don't necessarily understand, I think, when we talk about, well, hey, the island really is two different islands. You have more of a developed sort of estate type island and more of a true kind of nature walk, sort of untouched. And that's like the one part that they haven't really seen. So I think, getting them out there.
That seems like a really nice direction that we can, maybe Monica, work with you to see how we can facilitate that. Because I think in general, the more understanding of the island we can share with everyone, the better. The community will make better decisions.
Absolutely. I think some sort of a walking path in there is a great idea.
Sort of like the one that you had up through those wetlands, marshlands, whatever, that we have. I think it's in Selleck's Woods now.
Mm-hmm.
Don't we have like a kind of raised walkway?
Well, this is a different area. I don't remember this being quite that wet.
What?
I don't remember this area being.
No, that wasn't wet. It was just rocky.
There's gravelly. Yeah,
Maybe a little bit uneven.
Yeah, maybe just a suggestion. Has anyone been to Sheffield Island?
No.
Okay, so they run the ferry out there, and it has, I think, a 1.1 mile walk sort of path, but I think.
So it's a good comparable in some ways.
Yeah, and there's like a lighthouse you can visit out there and so forth. So it's
Where is this?
Sheffield Island.
Sheffield Island?
Norwalk.
Norwalk.
Yeah.
Just off the coast.
6 miles.
Yeah, and they run a ferry from South Norwalk out to there and back.
I mean, certainly you read in the master plan and whatever, that walking paths were a very highly desired amenity in town.
And I think one of the things we'll do is say, like, in past surveys for the whole community, these are things that have been identified in the work that you did for this project. This is what has been identified. And then I think some of the other suggestions that come to you. And then there is the low-hanging fruit, like the idea of having kayaks, parking. There's things that we know people are going to be interested in, and so we'll be evaluating those. Okay. Are there any other things that you want us to, I know it's getting late. So.
No, I think that was great.
Thank you all. Really happy to be here. We'd like to listen to this next part of your agenda, if that's okay.
Okay. So next on the agenda is an update from the Department of Public Works.
He will, you gotta be careful with him. Okay. Just for that, so it's done. Okay. So I have the first topic tonight is the access road to 23A. So we put it back out to bid, back on the street right now. Our bid opening date sorry, is August 8th. And from what I'm hearing now, construction will start September 23rd. I was hoping to start before that, but if there's going to be some functions on the island, I'm going to be careful with my start date. And I may start before that, as long as I leave complete access out to the road. I did extend the construction time period. That was one of the complaints that we got. We have till December 15th to have a roadway put in place that we can drive on. You have until May 15th to finish everything else after that. Whether it could be guardrails, it could be plantings, it could be the stone wall, it could be the veneer on the wall, whatever it may be, but I need access by the end of the year. So that's what we're working on right now. Tony has a couple more things.
How's the interest on your bidding?
I got a couple of emails while I was away. I'll answer those tomorrow, but mostly the questions have been targeting the engineer's estimate. So they're looking at a budget right now. They want to see what the number that they're getting compares to mine.
When did it go out? Sorry.
It's out on the road already. So the opening is August 8th.
Got it.
And the retaining wall is part of the initial project, right?
It is, it's part of the
Yeah,
entire
okay.
project, yeah. I had to do a design, before it was design build, that was one of the complaints that we got. No one wanted to take responsibility, so it took me about a month and a half to get the design done, soil testing was done, borings, and incorporated into the plan. Tony?
We get the design, he gets 23A, I get asbestos and sewer lines. The Dolphin House repair, number 24, that was done, completed at the end of June. So that is all buttoned up. Right next door at the main house, we had to do some interior waistline repair. It was done a few weeks ago at a cost of $4,000. Down at the dock, we put a gate with a push-button lock so the fire department can get in, but we're blocking access of people coming on from the boats and people getting dropped off and going out and meeting people on the dock in the cove. And the asbestos removal is still on the docket, but we're gonna wait till October 1st based on some tenant schedules. And that's all, unless there's any questions.
Tony, could you pass out the photos?
Oh, I'm sorry. I have the photos of the dock gate. We'll look at them now or later, whatever best. And our goal was just to keep it kind of slim and low profile, so when you're in the cove and you look up towards the stables, it's really, it's as thin as possible, and but accessible from the fire department. That's it.
Tony, you want to talk about the rocks, the signs?
Oh, we're going to be putting signs, I think Lori was mentioning about people coming up on the rocks, so we're trying to be putting signs where we've seen these swimmers and, stay off the rock signs. So otherwise, the activity's been steady, and we haven't had any issues. A lot of drop-offs at the dock, not a lot, but several. But, no damage, no vandalism, no mischief.
Tony, can you remind us, so we have, I think, 3, soon to be 2 tenants. Which of the facilities or people do we currently have tenants in?
So the greenhouse, the first house on the right, they're here and they're staying. Number 20, the Dolphin House, they haven't been around much, but they're staying.
And the Dolphin House just is which one?
Right to the north of the main house. And the pink house, number 18, he's in right now, but he plans on moving out October 1st, from what I understand. So, anything else?
Okay. Okay, next item is to review and approve the minutes of the May 15th, 2024 special meeting. I had one edit, Jennifer Lay's name and Curtis, the photos distributed by Douglas Elliman, those 2 names are spelled wrong. Does anyone else have any corrections, edits, changes?
I was in attendance.
You were? Any other corrections? Okay, so may I have a motion to approve with those corrections made? Mark moves.
Second.
Dan seconds. Okay.
We got a favor? We got a vote?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. All in favor? Terrific. Unanimous. Mike, you good?
Yep.
Okay. And next is review and approve the May 28th special meeting. Any edits, corrections, changes? I didn't see any either. Okay, may I have a motion to approve? Jeff moves. Dan seconds. All in favor? Unanimous? Mike? Yes, okay. And the May 29th, 2024 special meeting. Any edits, corrections, changes? Seeing none?
I didn't see anything.
May I have a motion to approve? Jim moves. Dan seconds. All in favor? Unanimous. Okay. All right. Terrific meeting. Thank you everyone for coming. And may I have a motion to adjourn? Mark moves. All in favor? Unanimous. Okay.